When you hear the word Europe, which cities come to mind? Paris, London, Rome. But what about Belgrade, Sofia, or Minsk? These cities are in Europe too, yet most people forget them. Why? Because Europe isn't one story, it's two. The rich West and the struggling East. But how did this invisible divide begin? The moment you hear the name Europe, which cities come to your mind? I'm pretty sure for most people it would be Paris, London, Barcelona, or Rome. Very few would think of Belgrade, Sofia, Minsk, or Chisinau, even though these cities are also in Europe. This is exactly what divides Europe into two parts. One is Eastern Europe and the other is Western Europe. Western Europe is known for its wealthy and well-developed economy, where the GDP per capita is around $68,000, but in Eastern Europe it's only about $14,000. Similarly, if we map GNI per capita, which shows the average annual income, the red-colored areas are those with the lowest income levels, while the green-colored ones are where the highest income levels are. You can clearly see that all high-income areas are in Western Europe, while the low-income areas are in Eastern Europe. Europe is divided by an invisible economic line that hasn't shifted even an inch since World War II. But why is that? Despite being on the same continent, why is there such a huge difference between Eastern and Western Europe? The reasons lie deeply in Europe's history and geography. The truth is, in today's video, we are going to see why Eastern Europe became so poor while Western Europe became so rich. Despite being the second smallest continent in the world, Europe has been the most powerful continent of the 20th and 21st centuries. Even today, many of the world's biggest economic powers are in Europe, which is why Europe still holds so much influence in world politics. Looking at the map of Europe, to the south are the Mediterranean, Black Sea, and Caspian Sea. To the north is the Arctic Ocean, to the west is the Atlantic Ocean. In the Atlantic lie Ireland and Iceland, both part of Europe, and even Greenland is culturally and politically European. Now the question arises, despite being so culturally, religiously, and geographically connected, why is there such a big difference in the progress of Eastern and Western Europe? To know the first reason, we need to go back 80 years when World War II ended. At that time, the map of Europe looked like this. The green-colored countries were the democratic and capitalist ones, while the red-colored ones were either directly under Soviet Union control or heavily influenced by Soviet communist ideology. Communism or socialism believed that all resources, businesses, and land should be controlled by the government. The idea was that instead of just a few people becoming rich, everyone in society should have equal opportunities and returns. So health care, education, and housing should be equal for all. The problem with this idea was that people had no incentive to start businesses or invent new things because all profits and returns were taken by the government, which then redistributed them equally. So, why would anyone work harder if everyone gets the same anyway? In contrast, capitalist societies gave people freedom to run businesses, make profits, and the government only took a share of that in the form of taxes. From 1945 to 1991, Western Europe, following capitalism, rapidly industrialized and surged far ahead of Eastern Europe. Then in 1991, communism collapsed, and with it, the Soviet Union. The European states that had been under its control became independent. But even after more than 30 years, Eastern Europe is still far behind Western Europe economically. Why? A huge reason lies in Eastern Europe's geography. On one side, countries like Ukraine, Poland, and Belarus have flat, fertile lands perfect for agriculture. But those same flat lands made it easy for invaders to attack. That's why these countries have historically been conflict zones. Poland, for instance, is perhaps the most invaded country in Europe, targeted by Sweden, the Ottoman Empire, and the Soviet Union alike. Despite fertile land, these countries could never fully benefit from their agricultural production because invaders would destroy everything every few decades. On the other extreme, in southeastern Europe, the Balkans, there are so many mountains that building infrastructure has always been difficult. That's why this region has remained the most backward part of Eastern Europe. From the perspective of peace and stability too, Eastern Europe has been highly troubled. Since 1991, almost all European conflicts have occurred in Eastern Europe. This has damaged not only their economies but also their migration rates. During the Yugoslav wars, millions left the Balkans for Western Europe, leaving behind a shortage of skilled workers. In the current Russia-Ukraine war, there has also been massive emigration, once again putting the future of Eastern Europe in question. But perhaps the most important geographic factor is access to seas. Western European countries had the advantage of being surrounded by seas, the Baltic Sea in the northeast, the North Sea and Atlantic Ocean to the west, the Mediterranean Sea to the south. This gave them the chance, starting in the 16th century, to use the seas for trade routes, exploration, and colonization. They built empires by looting resources from colonies overseas. This is exactly what the British, Spanish, and French empires did, at one time controlling 40% of the world's wealth. In contrast, Eastern Europe was mostly landlocked and cut off from global trade. Even the Eastern European countries that had access to seas were at choke points controlled by others. For example, to reach the Atlantic, Poland and others had to pass through the Danish Straits, controlled by Sweden and Germany, who charged fees.
Southeastern countries needed to pass through the Bosporus Strait, controlled by the Ottoman Empire, and even after crossing that, they had to pass through the Strait of Gibraltar, controlled alternately by Muslims, Spaniards, or Ottomans. So Eastern Europe was heavily dependent on Western Europe for sea trade. Later, in the 20th century, North Sea oil and gas reserves gave another huge boost to Western Europe, turning Norway, Britain, the Netherlands, and Germany into 21st century powerhouses. Eastern Europe, on the other hand, was not so lucky in natural resources apart from fertile land. It had no major reserves. Still, Eastern Europe is not completely deprived. Its agricultural production is massive, and without communism, it might have become the world's food basket. Although these countries became independent from the Soviet Union in 1991, communism's aftereffects lasted many years. Only a few countries like Poland, the Czech Republic, and Romania managed to develop, and that was largely because they joined the European Union. Why couldn't the others join? Because the EU has strict requirements, one of the biggest being levels of corruption. If we map Europe's 10 most corrupt states, you can see they are all in Eastern Europe. That doesn't mean Western Europe is corruption-free, but corruption there does not exceed national interests. That's why Western Europe has continued to dominate the world. While in our subcontinent, thousands of young people still dream of moving to Europe to secure their and their children's future. So all in all, geography and communism are the two main reasons Eastern Europe could not become as rich as Western Europe. But as they say, everyone's time eventually comes, and those who are at the bottom today can rise to the top tomorrow. This may be happening with Eastern Europe already. The biggest example is Poland, once among Europe's poorest countries, but today rapidly rising to become the continent's next superpower. We've discussed Poland's transformation in another video at the end. At the same time, many Western European economies are collapsing fast. The biggest example is Ireland, which has the second highest GDP per capita in Europe after Luxembourg. Yet, people are now leaving Ireland. But why? Why are people abandoning one of the richest countries in the world? To know that, watch our video on Ireland. Here are all the sources we consulted for today's video. See you in the next video with another interesting topic. Take care. Goodbye.